Everybody, welcome to another installment of Show to Be with Mike G. The show of a life, the show of the police, the show of Nebraska's Saddle Creek, Chapel Hill around the early 90s, and Scotch with Ardbeg and Glenmorangie's U.S. Central brand ambassador, Mr. Dan Crowell. A very, very thought-provoking chat with Dan. Dan comes from a very interesting background as a drummer, musician, artist, shifting into hospitality, and now traveling all around, speaking the praises of Scotch, Glenmorangie, and Ardbeg specifically. In a sense, this is a philosophical chat. Dan chatting about the universe, our purposes, punk ethos, so many things. So I hope you guys really enjoy this chat with Mr. Dan Crowell of Ardbeg and Glenmorangie.
I was born in North Dakota, but we weren't there long.
No.
So the 747 Air Force family. So my dad was stationed there, and he was just about to be transferred when I was born. So he was transferred to Little Rock, Arkansas.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so we bounced around a bit, but he retired from the Air Force in Omaha, where he and my mom were born. So
really,
I've been in Omaha since I was 5.
Okay, so pretty stable, unlike a lot of military families.
Yeah, exactly. Being the 7th of 7 helped in terms of my being on the tail end of the chaos.
Everybody's got to be really tired by that point.
Yeah, I don't know how my mom did it. I mean, she's a machine, so good for her. But it wasn't something that was a real big. I want to say we moved 3 times in town.
Yeah,
and 1, 2, 3 times before I got to New Hampshire, and then the moving was basically over until I moved out.
That's crazy. So I moved around a bit too. My dad was in the restaurant business.
Oh, very cool.
So operations typically. And so we would move probably like every 4 years, just like clockwork, even up until my junior year of high school. So really, really late. But so the question I have for you as like a kid that kind of moved a bit, what centered you? What kind of became your friends? Because it's hard to be social and meet people all the time.
Truly,
right?
yeah. Well, the broader answer is a big family. You sort of take your circle with you when you're part of a big family. But I was the oops kid. I mean, it wasn't a huge gap. My oldest sister is 10 years older than me.
Oh, that's not so
there's 7 kids, but it's 6 kids in 7 years and 7 kids in 10 years. So there was that. The only real gap that existed was between myself and my siblings, and so on a broader scale, we all sort of just bounced around the country together, but when it came time for me to try to establish a consistent group of friends or peer group, I had the first half of grade school, second half of grade school, junior high, and then high school. So there was a 4 different significant pods.
Those chunks are hard,
Yeah, so you do that thing where you learn how to be self-deprecating, you learn how to be sort of engaging without drawing too much attention to yourself and all that sort of thing.
What was the weekend rigmarole for you? What was something that you typically did? Because I wasn't at parties, man.
As a kid, as a little kid. Actually, when I was real small, we traveled a lot. And camping trips and fishing trips and so on and so forth. As sort of the crew, we'd be hauling down the interstate in some massive car, and there'd be people counting the heads in the car to figure out that's 9 people in that car. Oh my God! So there was a lot of that. But by the time that's the sort of the family unit started to just splinter apart and kids growing up and moving out, I suppose there was all kinds of stuff, scouts and 4-H and all those things that you do in the Midwest that take up your weekend time.
So pretty nature based stuff.
Yeah, my dad was big into. We moved onto an acreage when I was I want to say 10, 11.
Really?
Yeah, it was in the middle of, well, not the middle, it was south of Omaha, but he was big into wanting to capture that rural lifestyle in an urban setting. And
what about animals and such?
Yep. I had my sister had a horse, and I had a rabbit, and my brother had a cow, and So we all sort of raised them in that 4-H environment. And
you guys
showed
grow
them
anything there too?
No, it wasn't quite that big.
Okay.
We didn't. There wasn't really any gardening. Although I did have a pumpkin patch as a kid, so that was kind of my experiment in the agrarian lifestyle.
But it does connect you to something that maybe is different now in this fast-paced booze industry, right? Like starting from that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the connection to the soil, and my father-in-law is a farmer.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of full circle connection to growing things and consuming things, and having that be an organic and life cycle thing that you have to pay attention to. You have to nurture it. You got to pay attention to things like rain and the kinds of things you can't control.
That's right, and it's good. I think that's in a larger sociological sense. That's nice because we've got everything else. Yep. It's all so controlled.
Oh my goodness!
We can schedule posts. We know exactly how many friends we've got.
Yep.
So it's nice to come from that organic kind of analog world.
Yep. It's not that it's humbling, but it gives you a sense of. It's weird how you can develop a sense of control over the arc of your life, which is obviously illusory to a certain degree. Yeah. But there's a certain amount of control that can be wrestled out of understanding how little control you really have.
That's a great point. You're freed by your admittance that you got no control at all. I
don't think that you can sit around and obsess about the things you can't control. You just have to be really good at identifying accurately which is which. And I think there's a tremendous source of stress associated with misdiagnosing what you can and what you can't control. Yeah. So if you're honest with yourself and you try to, you do your best to try to diagnose without letting yourself off of a hook or without putting yourself onto superfluous hooks, you can find a path that puts you in a pretty good position there. Yeah,
I think that's maybe one of the most important things about living life, actually.
I think so.
Just admit that you don't know and that you have no control, and just let life hit you the way it will,
as long as there's an element of the curiosity that would go with pursuing a greater degree of diagnostic skills and a greater degree of control of the things that you can, as long as it's not control over other people or the arc of their life. If you're disciplined in your approach in trying to find where the crest of that wave is that you can ride and maintain some forward momentum between control and chaos, then it's a bit like surfing. It's a constantly forward momentum.
Do you think that what I find as an inquisitive nature towards culture, which Scotch is a great way to enter into it.
Yeah.
Was that something that your folks and your family were always they're very open to different cultures, open new experiences?
Yeah, and one of the things that you run into when you move around a lot as a kid is a lot of different people, a lot of different kids, a lot of different families, and as much as 4-H might have been a thing that there was a little more homogenous in terms of demographics.
Right.
Being involved in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts wasn't. There was a broad demographic. I lived, when I started to kind of gel into a conscious critter. That was in South Omaha in Nebraska, and it's a pretty diverse place. Yeah, a fairly tremendous Latino influence.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. South Omaha is not so much anymore. There's a pretty strong Somali population in South Omaha these days.
That's interesting.
Too.
Yeah. I had no idea.
It's a more diverse place than you might think looking at it on a map.
I think because it's so landlocked, right? That people just assume that it's just got to be white people.
It's just got to be basically white and rural, and it's. Really, no. Omaha nowadays, the greater metro area is something on the 6 to 650 in terms of population. It's a relatively huge place for a little town. It's still got its littleness,
right?
It's big enough to be interesting and little enough not to be full of itself.
Yeah, which is great because we're actually a little bit full of ourselves.
Well, and the thing about Austin is that people really want to be here. One of the things that I try to explain as the hidden gem of Omahadom is that people don't move there to say they're from there. So, that's not the first.
It's true, yeah.
It's not the first segment of the sleeve that they wear. So instead, it's a bit people who are. It's like going and touring Glenmorangie. If you are there, you gotta want to be there. It's not near other things. It's nothing unless you're really into zoos or Boys Town.
Yeah.
There really isn't anything that is a national or international calling card. College World Series 2 weeks ago, but there's nothing really about Omaha.
There, right?
Yeah, that's going to be a calling card that you're going to sit at LAX or something and say, "Yeah, I'm going to Omaha," and then kind of polish your own turds to a certain degree and congratulate yourself on being a part of that. So the people that are there on purpose. They're there for a purpose, and they're certainly not the sort of people, by and large, who are going to draw a tremendous amount of attention to who it is that they are or what it is that they're trying to do. They just go about the business of doing and being those things.
It's an amazing thing, and that's we got to talk about this Omaha piece because very influential for me as a musician, quote unquote, right? But as a drummer and that music bug, when did that find you?
I want to say 13.
Perfect age for it.
Yeah, it was a little late. I played piano for a little while. My sister
really?
and I took lessons from the same gal who was a gem and absolutely influential on being a good and critical listener. And understanding that musicianship, even though as a 6 or 7 or 8 year old, I didn't have, and I still fight that little tiny kid inside who doesn't necessarily have a strong degree of discipline in terms of things like practicing. And I'm still that kid. I'm still that kind of lazy little kid.
Scales are the worst.
So so it actually kind of helped to be thrust into a situation where my teacher was like, "You haven't touched a keyboard since the last time I saw you, have you?" I'm like, "No." And so and it's obvious, and then your sort of your internal sense of pride is like, "Nah, that's not me. I'm not going to sit and waste my dad's money and be a chunky player for the rest of my life." So by the time piano was a thing that wasn't necessarily striking a match for me, I had met a couple of people who played drums, and I thought I liked the physicality of it. And
did you like the tonality of it? Because melody, in a sense, is kind of removed. It's patterns instead of melody, in my opinion, with drums.
Yeah, shapes and dynamics.
That's right.
And a sculpting a bit of the connective tissue that binds everybody together. Tonality is one thing, but rhythm is everybody's got a metronome built into them. So. There's
tapping our foots all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, your heartbeat is a thing that you're born with, and you die, and after it goes, you're dead. It was actually the thing that occurred to me. The light bulb went on when my neighbor down the street, who was my best friend at the time, he did 2 things. His mother bought him a snare drum, and the Police's third record, Zenyatta Mondatta.
Oh yeah,
and I looked at one and listened to the other one and put the 2 together and bought the drum from him within a fairly short period of time, and it was kind of over after that.
I can't imagine how you play beats then, because Stuart Copeland is so strange.
Well, it's good to start by modeling your conception of the instrument and its place in music after somebody who does not conform to any real norms, and so you don't. It's not like you have to fight your way out of some prison, some intellectual prison that you accidentally built because you sat around listening to. And there is nothing wrong with Phil Rudd from AC/DC. I love that guy.
Phil Rudd is solid.
Oh yeah, he
but that's
throws it
right?
down, and that's the point. If you took a Stuart Copeland and Phil Rudd and you jammed them together, you would have a disciplinarian who takes care of business and nails the beat on the top of its head with a massive hammer. And then you've got another guy who's pushing and pulling and shoving things around and making the whole concept of rhythmic interaction into his sort of plaything.
Yeah.
In a really interesting way.
And to have that be accessible pop music still boggles my mind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the first record, like Roxanne and stuff, is very, very straightforward, even though that one's a slightly more rhythmic and a little off-tempo. But then once you get into, what is it, On the Moon?
Walking on the Moon, yeah.
I mean, like stuff like that, where the drums are they're kind of just like punching and offbeats and stuff, and it's a really interesting place to start. So obviously, your mind's probably lit up with ideas.
Yeah, and the thing was, I discovered later on that I didn't understand the roots of what they had come from. I knew the Police before I knew what reggae was, so I did it backwards. I mean, kids older than me, my brothers and sisters who were listening to some really formative stuff. The first record that I remember physically sort of being able to put on a turntable and put a needle on it without getting yelled at was Neil Young's After the Gold Rush, which was my sister's record. And I listened to it until I had it completely memorized. My brother was a huge Beatles fan. So all of those things happened. And then my oldest brother bought me my first Police record, and he said, these guys have got something going on here. It takes from some diverse influences and jams them together in a way that bends the ear of the world. So maybe listen to it. Yeah. And the longer that I did, and the more I grew up and started understanding what real reggae was and what Copeland was doing that was very Sly and Robbie-esque, but also Mitch Mitchell-ease. And he was a giant John Densmore fan. So you take the Doors and Hendrix and Sly and Robbie and what was happening in the rhythm section of the Wailers, back in the day. Yeah. And you end up with Stuart Copeland if you put those things together and listen to them while you were growing up in Beirut.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So you have a tall, lanky dude who hits the drums in a weird angle, right?
Yes, and then you end up with that guy. Yeah, there exactly right.
Which is fine. It's just a straight. His drums do sound like how he looks, like his stature.
Yeah, yeah. He's a very physical. Even now, you go and see him, and he hasn't. It's weird. He hasn't. Not only has he not lost his step, he's gained many steps.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He just crushes. Not to mention what he's doing in terms of commissioned operas and soundtracks and purchasing the rights to the original black and white print of Ben-Hur and then writing a score to it.
Really?
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, but Ben-Hur.
Yeah, the real live silent Ben-Hur, the black and white silent one. Yeah. Wow. So and he actually physically restored the film.
That's incredible.
And then wrote a score to it. And I don't know if it was ever recorded, but it was actually the way that it was presented to the public was with a live orchestra, showing the movie with a live orchestra, and then in arenas where actual horses and stuff were wandering around.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it was something else.
I didn't realize he was doing that.
Yeah, so an immense film scoring presence from a fairly early age. By the time the Police were beginning to go away, Copeland was becoming a film composer in his own right. His first film soundtrack was of a Francis Ford Coppola film called Rumblefish.
I didn't know that was him.
Yeah,
black and white again.
Kids, Francis's kids were big police fans, and they're like, "You should get that guy." So that's what they did.
I had no idea. That's incredible. So, well, then it sounds like there is some kind of match made in heaven with music for you, and it takes you pretty far, right? You actually study music proper at the University of Nebraska.
Right? Went to Nebraska, studied percussion performance and English and psychology and things like that, and that went really well until it came time for me to decide, okay, the band that I'm in is actually getting a little bit of interest. We're getting some traction here, and there's the original stuff is compelling to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not done with school, so what do I do? So I quit school and
you have to
full time. Yeah, in that band.
Which band
is
this?
Guerrilla Theater.
So Guerrilla Theater.
Yeah, I left school to do that.
Circa 92, 93?
Yeah, it was. I want to say I left school in 90, and it was a fairly full court press until about 93.
Yeah.
When I'd been married for a year at that point, and the band sort of spun out of control.
About how old were you then?
I got married at 25, so that would have been, that would have been 92. So it was it was a fairly quick process between leaving school, diving headlong into the band, and getting married. So
can I ask you, this is my second marriage this time, and I'm really enjoying this one. And I always wonder what drives someone who has that ambition on the music side of it, which is a tumultuous thing for a relationship.
Truly.
Why get married then? Was it just the right person? Was it the right time?
It was not the right time, but it was absolutely the right person.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't a thing that I set out with a mindset to, hey, I need to be married. It was kind of a thing that that hadn't crossed my mind until I met my wife. Yeah. And then it didn't stop crossing my mind. Basically throughout the course of our courtship and eventually marriage, everything I'm doing is nebulous and difficult, and it's tough to put your finger on. There's really no process behind it. This is one thing that I need, that I need to secure in terms of her influence in my life, and
because it's like one of those things when you love somebody and it's so clear then you know that's stable for you in some part, right? Like emotionally, maybe. Like,
you do. And honestly, I think it was actually a lot of it occurred beyond my ability to understand exactly what was going on at the time. Because me at 25 and me at now 50, well, I'm pushing 50 this next month. They're two decidedly different people with the same nucleus to a certain degree. And that nucleus was formed, at 2 or 3 years old when you have a sense of the indelible chunks of you and how to keep them from eroding into the mist to a certain degree. What occurred to me that at the point that I met her was it was something that I was compelled from sort of the cosmos. I for a while there was like, I don't really understand what's going on here, but it's like a tractor beam. I'm absolutely drawn into her existence, and I just can't let it slip away from me because it occurred to me at the time to be as important as breathing. Like, this is a thing I have to not necessarily lock up, but I have to weave into my psyche for the long haul, for good. And it wasn't ideal. I mean, she sort of, being a musician, looking at me, the musician thing was more of a liability than anything. I think that she saw something in me that there was some indelible character attached to it, but it wasn't. The music thing was absolutely not my calling card in terms of where she was coming from. It just became something that you do a lot of meditating about those things and trying to read the tea leaves, the universal signals, and that one just kept coming up. Yes, absolutely.
So there's a couple things. One, I want to kind of talk about guerrilla theater and how that kind of grew and how big you actually got. But I'm getting this interesting underlying thread, which I think is really lovely, that you feel connected to the universe, right? Now, a lot of people, the reason I say that, and I'll ask you a question in a second, is that people say it's God, right? But they use that, that's the lexicon they use. There's kind of religious vocabulary, which is fine if that's how you see the world, no problem, right? But for you, it feels spiritual, feels celestial. Like, when did you develop this kind of sense of connection to that kind of thing?
It's an interesting question. I think it's always been there, and I have only begun to fully understand it somewhat recently.
Yeah.
My dad passed away in August of 2016, and it crystallized what I'd always had a hunch about, which was that thing, that energy source that is at the core of each individual is indestructible, eternal, has nothing to do with the here and now. It only has to do with it just always was and always will be.
Cannot be created nor destroyed, right?
Yeah, see, it's like a massive cosmic radio, and everybody's got their spot on the dial. Yeah. And that frequency, again, can't be created or destroyed. It just always was. From time to time, it gets picked off by terrestrial creatures here and there, and you end up crystallized inside of a shell that has a lifespan and a shelf life, and sometimes depending on the shell's ability to become sentient, that you can get closer and closer and closer to realizing the sort of the divinity of your own spirit to a certain degree. And for me, that's always kind of felt like, well, if you have to apply structure to it, and if you have to apply communal, understandable, functional, actionable structure to it, then you call it religion, and that's completely fine. Sure. For me, spirituality is a huge thing, and religion isn't. And I understand. I understand why it is for some folks, and that works for them. Then it puts them more sort of in contact with the essence of their being, and they need that structure, and that's fine. I'm not saying anything other than that's not how that energy is communicated to me most effectively.
Right.
It's a little bit closer to understanding that there is no without interjecting a lot of self-indulgent arrogance. There is no line between God and man. I don't think it's there. It's one it's one cosmic energy ball with little bits sort of shaved off and flung around the cosmos, so that when we all sit around feeling as though we're not worthy somehow, or that we need to hide our heads in shame or whatever it is, I hear that as being a dissipation of ultra vital energy that is misplaced, that doesn't breed positivity, and that is unempowering. If anything, this for me, and the way that those things make sense for me, the structure of the religions that I've been exposed to is more of a barrier between me and that energy than it is a set of connected tissue.
Totally.
And that's, again,
I want more things that are inclusive.
Exactly right.
That connect me to the greater world. Because you ever step out, and again, this kind of ties back to Scotch. You take a sip of it sometimes, and
totally,
not to oversell Scotch, but it connects you to this time and place. And how is that even possible, right? If we're so sanctioned, and nature's nature, it's not me. Right. Water's water. That's not me. Yep. But if we're all part of the same thing, which we are genetically, right? Yep. Then Scotch as transportative. Right?
Yeah.
And many, many things are. Just sitting outside by the lake is transportative. So this is what I was picking up on, and I think it's a really, really amazing way that helps us kind of feel open to anything in the world,
right?
Not creating obstacles that are perimeters created by our beliefs, right? Well, because that's a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of whiskey in particular and the distilled spirits, there's a reason that it's called that, and there's a reason it's called Water of Life. There's a reason that the clergy were basically the first people to figure it out. Some of them enlightened characters in the historic play of distilled spirits. I think they picked up on that. They picked up on this idea that this sort of thing could be, granted, they set out to distill from the earth the ability to live forever, and that didn't work out so well. But the result is the resulting mistake, or whatever it is, has worked out pretty well for humanity. But when I do lots of bar staff trainings and public events and front of house staff trainings and even in retail, and trying to explain to people that one of the significant pillars or layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is community. And so when you can tie this stuff to an effort to connect and understand one another on a slightly more inclusive and understanding level, then you're doing something very constructive. Distilled spirits have the effect on the human physiology of reducing anxiety, judgments, inhibitions, things like that. I mean, if used in moderation, the social lubricant thing. It's accurate to the extent that you want to, whatever picture you want to paint. In terms of how do you see social lubricant coming to life? Is it, strip twister, or is it actually sitting around and talking to people and having some connection with them and having a greater understanding of why we are in each other's, life cycles and all those kinds of things. And it's, your point is a good one regarding the people who made this. I mean, I've met them, but it's a concept in the industry. For the most part, if you're drinking a glass of Ardbeg or Glenmorangie, whoever's whiskey it is, the odds that you're going to meet the person who actually created that liquid is fairly low, but you are speaking with them in real time. You are communing with them. It's exactly like music.
It's exactly.
I was listening to Bowie's Black Star on the way over. It's like, this guy's gone, but he's not. He's right here in my car,
in a sense.
And I am listening to the sound inside of his head. I'm listening to the essence of his spirit, and there's something about that makes you less fearful of other people, makes you less fearful of death, makes you more connected to not only the here and now, but what was and what it is to come, and putting those things into context. All of those things, in total, hopefully, have the net effect of showing people in a very sort of Tibetan Buddhist sort of a way the beauty of their internal light. However it came to be, even if it's even if an individual's circumstances are, in the present, they're suffering greatly, or they're unemployed, or they're homeless, or they're being persecuted for whatever reason, or where they live on the planet is full of angst and anger and aggression.
Right.
It doesn't mean that what is at their nucleus isn't the most potent energy in the known universe.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to think about, and I like that. I very much agree with that, and that always helps in a conversation, right?
I think so. Yeah.
When we're in accordance, right?
Right.
So then, as this has transformed, because again, I'm seeing this. The nucleus is here, but I'm seeing the different aspects of it kind of being revealed in different phases and different chapters of your life. Right?
Yeah.
So the music piece, the guerrilla theater piece, you guys were getting big. Now, what does that mean to you? What did that mean to you?
What we had done, we were accidentally sort of not necessarily the children of the early '90s Seattle movement, but it certainly was difficult to escape it.
Yeah.
What we had come at it, the direction we had come at each other from, the many directions were really, really diverse. Our bassist at the time was a huge funk R&B guy. My best friend at the time, who was a principal songwriter, we'd been listening to punk, post-punk, all of that stuff, pretty much in early Cure and those kinds of things, pretty incessantly. And our vocalist team, and eventually our lead vocalist, had come at it from a slightly different direction as well. So when those elements came to be under this sort of in the crucible of the early '90s, it took a slightly more early '90s sound on than any of us had intended.
Yeah.
But I honestly remember sitting in the drumming chair and thinking, how do I bring this into reality as hard as I can? Mm-hmm. How do I create for myself and for the people who are listening to this? I suppose that's me. We'll
Popular guy, of course, right?
That should get rid of it. As the band evolved, my approach became more visceral and more sort of my best attempt at controlled violence. And the band got louder and louder and louder and louder, and I didn't mind that, not one bit. It was sort of in line with my general tendency to take a thing and try to find the edge of the envelope and then push that really hard.
Yeah.
And so it felt right to me. It always felt right to me. So when there was interest, independent label, major label interest, and it wasn't big. Yeah. There was some.
Sure, but that's something.
Modest.
Right?
And we had put a lot of time and resources and energy into creating a portfolio of original music that we were all very proud of. And we did our best to shop it. We did our best. And back in those days, it was possible to actually earn a living as a musician.
Right.
And that's with rare exception, that's kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. But at that point, you did the thing where you got an agent and you dealt with major label A&R, and the indies were just beginning to happen. And so we did everything we could to try to garner interest in securing a label deal.
Right.
And so we spent a lot of time on the road. We spent a lot of time in the sort of the Midwest college circuit stuff, just trying to.
Who were some contemporaries at that point?
Well, honestly, we were in the Omaha scene at essentially the same time that 311 was.
Oh yeah, that's right.
We shared the stage with those guys on a number of occasions, and I heard what they were doing, and those guys were a micro generation behind me. And I was like, I see where they're going. Yeah. And there's a real potency there. There's a real sort of palpable energy and connectivity to it. And I think they're going to be, and of course they're massive players. Yeah. Chad and I were
Chad Sexton, right?
Yeah, because he worked at the drum shop I shopped at.
Oh, no kidding.
His mother helped run it, and so I'd run into him on a pretty regular basis. And he's a really, really nice guy.
Yeah.
He was a drum corps kid, so his chops were always just stunning. So when what happened for them, it was a combination of a lot of things. The the melting pot that they had created stylistically, the chops that they had honed incessantly, and their commitment to the project. They were the Five Musketeers. There was nothing that was.
And they've remained the same band ever since.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, absolutely.
Everybody's the same member, from what I understand.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So when that band was coming up, we shared stages and we shared that scene. And those guys, they ended up getting deal with Interscope, which was terrific at the time that my band was sort of spinning out of control.
Personality thing, or
a little, not necessarily interpersonal. That would come later, but in terms of the managing of each individual's managing of his own sort of stuff, that was not going particularly well, and so it met its demise, and I ended up bouncing from that band to another band called Digital Sex, which was a pretty big Omaha band in the late '80s.
And then they got back,
then they got back together, and
joined,
I got recruited for the gigs. Yeah. So that it was kind of from one right into the other, and that was another crucible of personality types that ended up sort of spiraling out of control and splintering out again. And by the time that was over, it was. I remember being in Digital Sex. It was about a year where we were active, and Connor was opened for us on a regular basis.
No kidding, that's crazy.
Yeah, and we didn't know what to make of him.
He's like what, 14 years old?
Yeah,
or something?
he was a little kid, not a little kid, but he was a kid.
Yeah.
And we honestly, I was listening to it. I'd sit and listen to him before we went on.
Yeah.
And it's like, this kid's owning it. He's absolutely dedicated to this message. And for a kid that age to have that kind of commitment to a message as a solo artist at 14 with an acoustic guitar and we'll call it an unorthodox voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was impressed by that. And so when you see the seeds of something, and then when it comes to fruition, you're like, makes sense.
Yeah.
It lines up. The math is all there. And you can't, one of those things, going back to the discussion regarding what you can control and what you can't, there are elements, you can use that, the slogan that you create your own luck, and I do believe that to a certain degree, but there's also got to be some organic luck that's happened. And I'm not saying that either of those entities were lucky people.
Right.
They just were still standing. It was almost like the last band standing through all the horse crap that goes along with trying to become an actual career musician.
Yeah.
And Tim, Tim, same way. Those guys are singularly dedicated to a purpose.
Yeah.
They have a message that they're committed to delivering. They have supreme confidence in that message, and they're going to deliver it with the most clarity and the most effective envelope around it that can be generated by that group of people. And I think Rob Nansel's, and AJ. I can't think of those guys. I can't think of the name. Anyway, the nucleus of what ended up being Saddle Creek. Those guys were astute listeners. They still are. I mean, they're astute listeners. They are confident. They also have they know how to put a business together, but they also know how to let that business be true to who they are. That always impressed me. We did as a function of what ended up spinning out of Guerrilla Theater was a recording studio and a record label. And so we did a lot of those same things, but the combination of personalities and timing and all this, it just didn't quite happen. We actually signed a couple of terrific local bands that to this day I think should have been giant, and we just couldn't get around our bullshit enough to actually make it a real thing, to make it a sort of a real boy. But the nucleus of the idea was very similar to what was happening all around us. We just where it worked in other instances, didn't go quite like we'd drawn it up on paper.
It was just a quarter of a beat off.
Yeah, and that's completely fine in hindsight. It was difficult at the time to see an action plan come to fruition, but not have it be you that it's coming to fruition for.
Yeah.
Of course, that's absolutely difficult.
But it's almost, we don't always see what our purpose is.
No,
right?
No, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and so obviously at some point the band piece fizzles, dissolves, whatever you want to call it, but you're behind a bar somewhere eventually.
Yeah, and so I remember one of my first days and one of my first legitimate restaurant jobs, the guy who was training me said, okay, so you got a gig in a restaurant. Are you an actor, artist, or musician? And I was like, well... because I mean everybody around me was too. It's a liquid way of making a living and maintaining flexibility and not living like an absolute pig. Right. So it appealed to me first because it facilitated what I was really trying to do, and secondarily it began to appeal to me in terms of its ability to connect to your passions and your psyche and your methodology for approaching how you apply yourself professionally,
sure,
in a way that was very similar to me to being in a band. The bringing a bar or restaurant brand to life on a daily basis is the execution against a vision and a plan, using a distinct and defined mechanism in order to do that. But it's got to be art and craft. You've got to do both really well.
How do you feel about? Because drummers aren't always the most social people, but not trying to paint you in a corner here, but soft skills are a massive piece of the hospitality industry. How did you feel about that? Catering to people that may be assholes.
Right. Well, yeah. It took a little while for me to switch gears. I never was. I felt like when you look at that singularity of purpose and the idea of the punk DIY thing. I had everything about it except the attitude. I always enjoyed being around people. I always enjoyed human interaction to a certain degree. Yes, the percentage of people in public who can be a pain in the ass and that sort of thing is relatively high, depending on what it is that you're trying to provide for them. Right. But I never really. I was sort of a fake punk to a certain degree because I actually enjoyed people, and I had the sort of the perfect Midwestern nuclear family. There's nothing for me to rebel against. Right. And I was just kind of having an interesting time growing up, and so being artificially pissed at things and people.
That's really superficial. It's not good. Yeah, it's disingenuous, and I mean, it causes you to be fake to other people.
Yeah, and the thing about having a message that you're committed to delivering is, the message has to have content that resonates with other people in some authentic way. Yeah. If you don't have something to say, then why on earth will people listen to you? And so that it wasn't as though I had plenty to say behind a set of drums, plenty, and I still do. Yeah. But I had just as much, and still do have just as much to say about the process of enjoying whiskey, or at the time running a bar and restaurant. There was something connective to me about the communal aspects of it, the sharing, the uniquenesses, and simultaneously the homogeny, the human condition, all those things to me, and all the little tiny nerdy nuances, all the kind of what is in that bottle, what is that screwy looking fungus, what is that, what's the name of that thing, what is this crazy Middle Eastern thing, what are these aromas and colors and all these things?
It's like a gearhead in a sense.
Absolutely.
Totally. What kind of distillation method? What kind of tubes are in that old Marshall Plexi, right? Like it's an extension of that, and obviously it appeals to you. But is there a point in which whiskey particularly became something even more magical and a genre that you particularly really found yourself in?
I had gone from running a particularly successful place that wasn't mine to buying into a place that was mine and singularly unsuccessful, and a real gut wrench, kick in the face, moment in time where shit got dark, and so once it found its bottom, I was in massive debt and unemployed, and there was nothing I could do. The thing about owning your own place is it's the one job you can't quit.
That's right.
And so when things are going straight to hell around you, you end up growing a fairly thick skin, but you also get resourceful as hell. And you find that when things come your way after that would have occurred to you in your past life as being devastating and dark and difficult, they are not nearly as intimidating as they would have been, because you've seen the bottom.
That's right.
And I remember interviewing for my first gig at a distributorship, which was where the whole whiskey thing came from. I remember sitting in that interview, and I was on my back, broke, like just absolutely broke, and completely unemployed. I had, we'll call it, an unusual resume at that point. And I remember sitting in that interview and thinking, you cannot do anything to me that I haven't done to myself.
Yeah.
You need me more than I need you. I understand your business better than you do, because I was one of your customers for a number of years and made a living based on attempted to make a living based on the output of your business structure. I know what you need. I know what you need to deliver to your audience better than you do. And so you need me. If you aren't perceptive enough to figure that out, I don't care.
Right.
And so I kind of let it rip in the interview, and walked out thinking, there isn't any way in hell that I'm going to get that job. And they gave it to me. And the job ended up being, technically on the front end of it, was an education position. High-end spirits. So I handled all the high-end spirits in my division of the company, from when they hit the dock till when they left, all inclusive, from how they went to the shelf and how we interface with the public and how we try to make them make sense to the broader consumer. Ended up being a labor of, wow, there's a lot, A, to know about this subsegment, and B, when I share those stories with people, they're genuinely intrigued by it.
Right.
And there's the gearhead thing, and there's the rabbit hole aspect that really appeals to me.
The trifecta.
So I felt like, and because single malt Scotch whiskey was probably the most diverse, confusing, and intriguing subset of the high-end spirits portfolio that I dealt with, it became a thing where I spent the majority of my time self-educating and the majority of my time in terms of education and discussion and public interface in single malt. And so I ended up, as a result of that, I got to give some credit to the Dundee Dell in Omaha, which is this unassuming little fish and chips place in Dundee that has 1,000 single malts available by the dram.
Holy shit!
So it would draw people to town that would otherwise have really no business being there. Master distillers and global brand ambassadors, and these people that I wouldn't, distillery owners and distillery managers would show up to sort of see this thing and get involved with it. And I ended up meeting the Glenmorangie and Ardbeg people because I was already dealing with them on a distributor level. It's just that I began those discussions with some of the key people on the distillery side of things. And then I started stalking them at Whiskey Fest Chicago every year, starting in 2005. And eventually, when the brand ambassador position for Glenmorangie and Ardbeg expanded from one guy in the U.S. to two, eventually four, I got a call, I interviewed, didn't get it the first time.
Oh,
actually.
really?
And so the second time, when it went from 2 to 4, with 3 and then 4, I got the middle of the country gig, and that was I'm on my 4th year now.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was just a kind of a thing where, I mean, like you said before, if whatever it is that you believe your prescribed path is at 16 or whatever it is, when you really start to believe, and it's the trouble with rock and roll, for a lack of a better word, is the thing about pursuing something with that punk ethos is that you see building alternatives or ways out or backup plans as being weak, as being a pre-admission of prescribed failure.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I remember thinking at 16, music is everything. It's the only thing that matters to me. Everything else is, at best, a diversion, and at its worst, a superfluous waste of my time, with the exception of my wife.
Right. But so think about what music is, and this is the thing. It's like, why have this set of skills? Obviously, it's only applicable for music, right?
Yeah.
Right. But then you realize, to strip it, what is music? Yeah. It's composition. It's performance. It's working with relationships with other people. It's being a slightly egotistical, wanting to see the world. It's all these things.
Yeah.
So that's a hat that many different positions could put on your head.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so now you think about it, And it's not a massive surprise. You're touring, if you think about it.
Yeah.
You're talking about this thing that you love. You're executing it in your own way. The rhythm, the tone of these presentations, educations, these seminars, that is all up to you.
Well, and nowadays, I mean, I do sort of look at it as a complete irony. I used to look at, okay, why do you get drawn into playing drums? Well, if you think about it, you're on stage, but you're kind of not. You are exposed, but you are surrounded. You have emblems of destruction that can harm people if they get too close to you. And so you're sort of back of house. You're the guys in the back with the knives.
Yeah.
You're working in a public environment, but you are not stage. You're not center stage.
Right.
And I liked that then, and I like it now because now I may be out in front of people and talking a lot about our whiskeys and about drinking in general and about drinking culture and Scotland and all those things, but it is not. I had nothing to do with making it.
Yeah,
it's only the delivery of a message that connects people to how that liquid connects to me.
Yeah, hired gun. Kind
yes,
of, right?
Yeah. And so now, nowadays, spending this year will be 183 probably days on the road. It feels like what I thought I wanted out of music.
Yeah.
But not solely determined by me, but I am a mobile army of one to a certain degree.
That's right.
As long as the distillery folks and the marketing people and all those people continue to do what they do well, which they do, then I'm sort of a rogue unit, and it's perfect.
It seems like a really great personality match and a functional match too. But I do have a question. So you pursued music for a while, obviously, and still it's in our course, right? We can't ever get away with it, and that caused maybe some friction with your wife. So what about now when you're traveling over 180 days a year?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we didn't do is have kids, and so that has a lot to do with why I get to do what I do now.
Yeah.
I couldn't let a child or children sort of grow up without being a part of that, or just being sort of a somebody who drops in on a string and then gets yanked back out and drops back in. I couldn't do it, and it wasn't something that either of us felt strongly compelled to pursue anyway. So because we're both the youngest of our families, and so we had we have pets because that's what we had.
That's right.
And so now she's pretty much always worked sort of banker's hours, and I was always in the restaurant industry. So there was from the beginning, from the genesis of the relationship, there was always a sort of not a time-based disconnect, but not a spiritual-based disconnect. Yeah. So what I do now isn't so dissimilar from what I've always done in terms of when I'm home and when I'm not. It's just the commute is a bit longer.
Gotcha. That makes some sense. Where are you located now? Are you in
Omaha still?
Omaha,
so
right?
on the weekends, on most weekends I get back home to Omaha.
It's amazing to be able to do that. Well, the thing that has brought us together, of course, besides music and Omaha and Saddle Creek and all of that stuff, is whiskey.
Yeah.
Passions for both of us. And you have the privilege, in a sense, to travel all around representing two amazing Scotch whiskeys. Distilleries, right? Because it's a different distillery between
Glenmorangie same ownership, and but two different distilleries.
Got it. Okay. So that was still, but that's almost like two different bands, right? It's like here's the side not that they're side projects, but different genres. Because Glenmorangie and Ardbeg do not taste the same.
No, they don't.
Right?
They're
totally
almost
different jar. Yeah.
They almost form the bookends to a really fascinating category.
That is absolutely right. So to kind of talk about maybe a few of the labels in these categories. Well, one is that you've really graced me with the presence of this Ardbeg 21, which you just have a little bit of it, right? How rare or how sought after is the Ardbeg 21? Is it something you can just go get a bottle of anywhere you want?
No. The thing about when 21 happened, there was a very small amount of it that was made, and the reason for that was that it was distilled while the distillery was still in a state of some limbo. It was on the road to being demolished and turned into a parking lot. It's one of the few distilleries that actually rose from its own ashes to a certain degree. It was closed for the 80s. It was actually physically closed from 80 to 89. Then it was reopened. It was still owned at that point by Allied de Mec, which had blending contracts with specifically with Ballantynes and teachers, and Ardbeg was a part of that. And so from time to time, is the serendipity of it was the guy who would come over and fire the distillery up for a month or two a year was Mickey Heads, who is now our distillery manager, but he was working at Isle Jure at the time, so he'd come over from Jure to Ardbeg, fire up distills, fulfill the blending contracts, and then shut it back down for 10 months.
Wow.
So this was distilled at a pretty tumultuous period when the future of the distillery absolutely was still hanging in the balance, and was distilled by the guy who works there now as distillery manager. So
it's his song, but back in the 80s, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a thing where the future sort of looked at the past and said, "I got this.
Yeah,
it's going to be fine."
That's amazing.
It's pretty cool. So this one I can't remember what the bottling strength is, but I want to say it's 46.
Yeah, it's what it feels like.
There's very little of it. It was released once and once only. We only typically do an age statement on our tenure. Almost everything else in the Ardbeg portfolio, in the modern Ardbeg portfolio, is non-age statement whiskey on purpose. But in this case, we wanted to do something to honor that we are coming up on 20 years of ownership of Ardbeg. Mickey's on his 10th year at Ardbeg.
Yeah.
If you find your way to Ardbeg, the still that Ardbeg 21 was distilled in is now out in the parking lot.
Wow.
It's the still that greets you out in the parking lot.
That's
So there's a lot of kind of connective tissue that makes this a really, really special dram. I believe it is aggressively sold out. There was very, very little that came into the U.S. and it sold kind of right away, and it's a pretty pricey bottle, but it'll show up on the auction secondary markets at some point.
I mean, this is just incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's damn beautiful, and there isn't a lot of opportunity to drink unless you have really deep pockets. Drinking really old Ardbegs is not only they're hard to come by, but they are painfully cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So when we had an opportunity to do it, even as small as it was, a bottling of 21, it was sort of an honor and a privilege to be able to do that, I think, for the distillery, and they wanted to share that particularly with the Ardbeg committee. And then again wanted to celebrate Mickey's 10 years. We were just off the 200th anniversary of Ardbeg as a distillery. So there were a lot of reasons to celebrate and a lot of reasons to put out something as painfully exclusive as this is, to try to celebrate all of those things in a single dram.
That's amazing. And in a way, there are plenty of years left for both of us, plenty of years left to accomplish things. But this is a way, I feel like we're kind of commemorating your story. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I feel about it a little bit. I mean, this is a special sip, and your life has been a very interesting one.
Well, if nothing else, it's been interesting, and the architecture behind it is to allow it to remain so.
Yeah.
I've been exceedingly fortunate to have pursued to this point an unorthodox path and not be a complete homeless indigent as a result. Certainly could have gone that way very, very easily. So I don't. It's not that I don't do structure well. I do structure really well. It's just that I don't find a lot of spiritual fulfillment or passionate connectivity in things that have distinctive pathways that lead to them. Because there's a lot of, it seems as though the road more traveled is traveled away from, is consciously away from conflict and peril and dangerous thought and to a certain extent the challenges associated with tangential thinking. And that's what I do. Tangential thinking is somebody else's tangent is my sort of path, and that's neither for better nor worse. I mean,
it's your methodology, it's your approach.
It is. It's that kind of. I've always been sort of drawn to people who don't feel a need to prescribe to pathways that are beaten into.
It's like templatized almost.
You don't. Yeah, I mean, I guess. For me, it's very important to remain open to the idea that there is a thread that draws you, that connects you to the arc of your own existence, and that thread isn't necessarily how you strung it out, but you do need to be open to being pulled by it a bit.
That's right.
You're not necessarily just being dragged along in a stream of events that you have no control over, that have no purpose and have no direction. It's just that your space on the dial is going to generate, especially if in the here and now that energy was fortunate to be captured by a sentient shell, then you can really do a lot to celebrate the uniqueness of that cosmic frequency and allow it to change the world around you, a little bit at a time, sometimes in big ways and sometimes in little tiny ways. But I'm very comfortable with the idea that I don't know what I'm not trying to slap labels or context. I'm not trying to grow a square watermelon. I'm not trying to put a box around.
You're going with
it.
You're not just
square.
resisting to resist.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
Again, be truthfully punk, which is accepting things but carving your way in there, right?
Right.
So I've got 2 questions left for you, one of which I'm really excited to ask you. But first is what you're here in town. I saw you were in San Antonio pretty recently as well. You're doing a twin liquor event tonight. So tell me what that's about.
So that is, at Ardbeg, we've recently developed a methodology for engaging our consumers by using virtual reality technology. So tonight's event will be there'll be about 50 people over a couple of sessions, and we'll slap the VR rigs on them and allow them to take a tour around Ardbeg, a walk up to Loch Ugadal, a dip into the Corrie of Wrekin, and sort of experience what Ardbeg is about as a place, what Ardbeg is about as a culturally and historically relevant chunk of Scotland, what Ardbeg the people are about, it's the most immersive place I've ever been personally. And since we can't share that directly with people, we wanted to give them a connective sense of what a teleportative experience drinking Ardbeg. If you're thinking about terroir or things like that, or putting you in a mindset and a place in time, a glass of Ardbeg will drag you halfway around the world and smack you down on the shores at Ardbeg, better and more effectively than anything I've ever drank.
That's amazing, yeah.
That's what we're trying to do tonight.
VR experience for Scotch.
Yeah,
who would have thought?
Of that.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
that's a very, very clever,
wonderfully immersive technology.
Clever idea. Well, the last question I've got for you, and this is now a staple in the show. I can't imagine. I'm sure you find so many people, so many places riveting and interesting. But let's just say you've got this. This is a perfect sip for it. But you've got the Ardbeg 21. You're at your favorite bar in the world, sipping this. And you could have a conversation with anybody, living or deceased. Who might you love to just sit there, just wax poetic, talk live, and have some Scotch with?
If I could find myself at the Port Charlotte Hotel on Isla, and if I could keep up, have a conversation with Nikola Tesla.
Oh,
he seems like a guy who was so thoroughly and immersively connected to purpose, and connected to the fundamental frequencies of the planet, and all the things that he did and invented and processes that he pioneered, combined with his gut sense that the benefit of his wisdom should be given away, to the greater benefit of mankind. That guy. If you could, no pun intended, but if you can distill it down to one guy, there are incredible numbers of intrinsically fascinating people that it would be great to hang out and drink with. But that guy feels to me as connected to my aspirations in terms of plug in and give it away. This is obviously a much, much smaller scale, and what he did had such a profound effect on the arc of human development and the modern civilization.
Right.
What I do in little tiny fraction is to try to plug into something as hard as I can, and allow the energy that I draw from it to be given away to everybody that I have contact with,
Yeah.
and hopefully show them or excite their DNA,
Neurons,
their magnetism to the point that they're drawn towards it. There's some gravity or some connectivity, passion or compassion, or both based. Connectivity is not enough. I don't know. I think people actually have a hard time. There's not enough passion in the world. There's not enough authentic passion in the world.
Right.
There's a lot of nowadays. Even there's a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of reading too many headlines and reading the wrong tea leaves and believing the loudest voices. So one of the things I try to do is to go out and exude passion and attempt to repair the social fabric a little bit at a time by reminding people of how connected they are to one another, how connected they are to process, how connected they are to recreation, and how rich and awesome the experience of life can be.
It's a beautiful sentiment, Dan. I mean, I couldn't have articulated it better than myself.
I appreciate that.
It's great, dude. It's been really good chatting with you.
Yeah.
I hope we can do this again.
I'd love to. There's hours
so much to
of
talk
material
about.
cover off on.
But, even just for my main benefit, we'll have to grab some Scotch here sometime soon, for sure.
Absolutely. I would love that. I let me just say I really, really appreciate this opportunity. The concept that you've sort of nailed about connecting whiskey and music and the pursuit of each is something that really speaks to me. And I wish you all the luck in pursuing it in the future.
Thanks so much, Dan. Talk soon, mate. Thanks so much. Well, there we have it. Mr. Dan Crowell of Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. Very eloquent, very articulate, very thought-provoking chat with Dan, the way he thinks about our purpose, our place, our essence in this universe. And it's always great to talk about the Police, 80s music, and Saddle Creek. It's a very influential thing for me, those bands, Cursive, Bright Eyes, Criteria, all those guys. And it's great to kind of share that love of music and Scotch with Dan. Dan is a very captivating guy. I'd love to see more presentations from him, and hopefully he'll hit more whiskey chats here in the next year, and I'll get to sit in. So thanks so much, Dan, for chatting with me. And thank you for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter how many times you're thinking in your head, not hot dog, or if you're saying, man, Ray Donovan is really a great show on Showtime, please keep dancing.